scroll you read, they spelled our name wrong. It just simply says undecided because they won't put our name on it. That's independent, and all the other ones paid for by the people that will stand here in front of you this evening. My wife and kid were supposed to be here. They got hit with a little bit of an illness, so they're not here. We invited a couple other folks, and we appreciate you taking their spot. I come from Elizabethtown, Kentucky. I'm just a regular guy that sees the world from the lens of the blue collar and white collar mesh, kind of as a small business owner. Mainly more blue collar. I own a small helicopter maintenance business that takes old Black Hawk helicopters from the Army, transitions them into civilian helicopters, and they're used for wildland fire and utility construction. In that job requires me to travel pretty extensively. And of course, I've been in aviation for the last 20 years. I'm a U.S. Air Force veteran, started as a helicopter mechanic. That's why I land in the profession that I am today. During COVID, we all know that the federal government decided that they were going to push a lot of mandates on most of the country. And one of those mandates was that anybody who traveled in commercial aviation must wear a mask. Well, as a boy who was abandoned at 2.5 months old across the bridge in Meade County and adopted by a farming family in Sonora, Kentucky until I was 3 years old, and then returned to an abusive mother at that age by the state of Kentucky, living there until I was 12, being abused by some of the most egregious people you could think of in the state, I had what they call generalized anxiety. So I can't cover my face for long periods of time. So I went and got a doctor's exemption, couldn't even get it in my state. I had to get it from a doctor in New Jersey. Gave that letter to the airlines, and they decided they didn't want to follow the law and the natural exemptions within those mandates, the exemptions thereof. So we looked all across the state and we thought, okay, somebody's got to be willing to take this case against the law and test it. And I'll have you know, there was nobody in the state that would take it. We called every one of them. So when they wouldn't, I decided I'd file the suit myself. So pro se, I filed a lawsuit against the TSA, the CDC, and 5 major airlines, all which refused to abide by the law. In the TSA case, which was in the 6th Circuit, 2 days later they put me on a terrorist watch list. Same one they put Kristi Noem on. So if you want any idea of how your government is acting, there's 13 DOT complaints that sit in front of, what's his name? The DOT director, Duffy. And I've got not a response one in over 5 years. So after the TSA, obviously we didn't win that case. We hammered down the CDC and the airline case, which is still active in the Western District of Kentucky in Louisville. Without counsel, we have passed a motion to dismiss. It's one of the hardest things to do as a pro se litigant because of how biased the courts are. So with that being said, you can imagine that the reason I'm running for U.S. Senate is because as a senator, guess who has the sole power of impeaching judges? It's the U.S. Senate. So beyond that, we need to look at, obviously, election integrity, having fiscal responsibility, free markets, and smaller governments. And I'll be honest with you, with no disrespect to the gentleman that was here before you, all the answers that were given to you sounded like a whole lot more of big government. As you may already tell, I'm not the most politically correct guy. So I brought in kind of a hypothetical finding for you. And I'd like to read it to you because it's everything that's wrong with what's going on in government. The governor of Kentucky is jogging with his dog along a nature trail. A coyote jumps out, attacks the governor's dog, and then bites the governor. The governor starts to intervene, but reflects on his, in our state, alleged Christian faith. He feels he should stop because the coyote is only doing what is natural. He calls animal control. Animal control captures the coyote, bills the state $200, testing it for diseases, and $500 to relocate it. He then calls a veterinarian. The vet collects the dead dog, bills the state for $200, testing it for diseases. The governor goes to the hospital spending $35, getting checked for diseases from the coyote and getting his bite wound bandaged. The running trail gets shut down for 6 months, while Fish and Wildlife conduct a $100,000 survey to make sure the area is now free of dangerous animals. The government spends $50,000 in state funds implementing a coyote awareness program for the residents of the area. The state legislature then spends $2 million to study how to better treat rabies and how to eradicate the disease throughout the world. The governor's security agent is fired for not stopping the attack. The state spends an additional $150,000 to hire and train a new agent with additional special training regarding the nature of coyotes. A citizen protests the coyote relocation and then files a $5 million lawsuit against the state. Now, let's speak about a typical Kentucky resident. A citizen in Kentucky is jogging with his dog in a nature trail. A coyote jumps out and attacks his dog. The citizen shoots the coyote with his legally acquired pistol and keeps jogging. The citizen has spent 50 cents on a .45 caliber hollow point cartridge. The buzzard eats the coyote. And that, my friends, is why Kentucky is broke, because you're not hiring citizen legislators with common sense. So let me finish with this. Go ahead, have at it. It was a good joke. You were paying attention. So listen, I'm just a regular fellow, just like most of y'all sitting here. Self-studied law because my government come after me. And if I was to sit by and let it happen, they were going to come after you, and I would quite appreciate it. I'm one of the nicest guys in the world, but not when you're hunting the rights of my people. So the enemy of my friends or my citizens is also my enemy, and I believe that enemy lives in Washington, D.C. Again, thank you for your time, and appreciate you having me, and appreciate your attention for the evening. I know your time is valuable. It's actually the one thing we spend every day that we do not know the real balance of. So thank you very much. Mike Faris for U.S. Senate.
Okay. 3 minutes, I believe. So you have 3 additional minutes onto the questions, just so you're aware. Hi everyone, forgot to introduce myself. My name is Alyssa, I'm the Vice Chair of the Campbell County Republican Party, and I'm asking questions today to Senate candidate Faris. The first question, they're the same. What legislative priorities would you champion to help stimulate a more affordable cost of living associated with food, energy, housing, and healthcare?
Thank you very much. Well, obviously the answer to all these questions before we even ask the rest of them is reduce the government, right? So less red tape, obviously, is going to help us the most. I've not championed anything legislatively in anything because I've never been in government at all. But what I can tell you is ultimately we should be codifying the 2017 tax cuts and then be getting rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse that we see in our government every day. And it's not just in Minnesota. Guys, it's right here in your own state. Actually, and it starts with your governor. He has spent millions of dollars traveling around the world campaigning for the U.S. presidency on your dime. And I'll just be honest with you, I think another thing you can look at is the idea of politicians who are currently politicians running for another political seat. Maybe they should step down, take a break, quit spending the taxpayer money running around the state campaigning for a separate seat while you're paying them to be dealing with legislation. Beyond that, when it comes to food, energy, housing, and healthcare, the food part is ultimately investing in your own farmers, right? Not getting the beef elsewhere. I know that's a contentious point, specifically because the president has decided that we would buy a bunch of Argentinian beef. But the idea of going outside the country to buy the things that we can grow right here, not just from large-scale farms, but encouraging entrepreneurs who have these other land plots who can then populate that area with, things like cows or vegetation, right? Giving them the subsidy, maybe giving them the grant instead of spending the money on foreign aid to make sure that that small business gets off its feet. I mean, look, the small business sector in this country is one of the hardest things to get off the ground. Most every small business that doesn't have a large foot in capital fails within the first year. So if you want to revitalize your country, the first thing you can do is hold the federal government accountable to the 23% of contractual jobs that they're supposed to give the small business as we sit today. And just to give you a little image of that, 98% of the businesses in this country are small businesses. There's only 2% owned by large corporations, and those large corporations create smaller sister businesses that then go on to get the contracts from the government because they said that small business was small. It still belongs to the government, the corporation up here. So need to be investing in true, real small businesses of this state, letting them rebuild your Brent Spence Bridge down here with a $3.6 billion package to get it and the 75 and 71 corridor back together and better for you. Hire those people that live in this area. Quit getting them out of another state, right? And I know you share a little bit of space with Ohio, so maybe cut that in half. When it comes to energy, look, I'm going to tell you right now, big coal is not coming back. They've Swiss cheesed those mountains, and the only way to get the rest of that coal is to bring the whole mountain down. It's too expensive. So you got to invest in those coal plants, revitalize them so that they're actually producing what's left to come out of the ground, right? And quit acting and trying to sell some political dream to people and give them false hope as they sit over Eastern Kentucky and struggle day in and day out. Quit building data centers that suck all the energy out of the grid, right? Or if you are going to build them on places that don't belong to farmers. If you're gonna strain the power grid, do better by making that grid better. Update it, upgrade it, right? And what was the other said? Housing, health. So housing is the same as infrastructure. You basically subsidize, the contractors, the local contractors building houses, give them the tax credits they need to make sure they can build houses for the families that are in need of them, that are struggling, right? When it comes to healthcare, actually we have a pretty decent plan on that. And the idea with healthcare is not to completely do away with Medicare and Medicaid, but is to let those programs starve as our older population dies off naturally. Right now, if we start with HSAs at an early age, give them to everybody, and because you're not going to cut the federal government out of healthcare at this point at all. They're way too invested because they've ballooned the 4 major healthcare companies in this country, being Centene, United, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Anthem. They're highway robbing your taxpayer dollar through your federal government and then charging you to take part in that same exact Ponzi scheme. So give the HSAs to the people that are young. Start them out low, and as they get older, make sure they can invest in themselves at a higher percentage, whether that's large-scale corporation or small businesses, right? And then you give them options. You give them competition. And with competition, you bring prices down, because guess what? If I'm the only Black Hawk helicopter guy in the state of Kentucky, I can charge whatever I want. If there's 10, I got to compete with 9 other people, and I got to be fair to those people, right? So with big corporations, big business, you're always going to have a little bit of what I call corporate greed. And that's, again, like I said, coming from the view of a guy who straddles the white and blue collar fence. So that would be my response to that question.
Thank you. The second question is, what concrete policies would you advocate for in the Senate to help secure America's border in a sustainable manner?
Okay, on the border, obviously I think the wall is a great idea. I mean, look, everywhere you look that somebody wants to be protected, there's a large fence or there's a large wall. So obviously we need to invest in getting that finished. You have to have a choke point. You got to have a level of entry. I mean, look, none of your houses sit at home right now with the door wide open. It's just not a thing. They've all got walls, they've all got doors, and you probably locked them as you walked out the door. Luckily, I live in an area that most of my doors are unlocked, but that was something that my dad taught me when I was young. And it was just from an old time thing where, nobody ever messed with anybody's stuff. It's a different world right now because we have all this illegal immigration, right? That door, whether locked or not, lawfully is the threshold of whether you're welcome inside that place or not. I know this because I've been in situations where I've had to defend my own self against intruders. And luckily the law stood on my side. But what I will say as far as going further deep into a state like Kentucky, which is nowhere near any of the borders that our federal government should be protecting, is doubling down on kind of like what T.J. Roberts has done in the legislature and allowing the local law enforcement to work closely with those border agents, train them. They know who's in those jails. They know who's in the community, right? We don't need the federal government in here telling us what to do in a sovereign state, do we? We're all grown people. I think we all understand what it means to make a good and bad decision. But the people coming in this country don't, because they've not been raised by the values of this country and a place like the state of Kentucky. Very down home, very regular folks, jubilant, very hospitable people. And we're up against an enemy that wants to abolish everything we exist for. So the idea is, let the locals do their jobs, let the small government do its job, right? And assist the larger government. Look, the U.S. Senate seat is meant to be a conduit and at the same time a wall between you and the federal government overreaching into your sovereign land and individual rights. So without further ado, that would be my answer to the second question.
Thank you. Should the U.S. continue funding foreign wars and international organizations at the expense of funding its domestic fiscal agenda? Where would you draw the line?
Okay, look, first of all, I gotta just clear the air because I'm not gonna be the guy that's gonna stand here and say Israel's our greatest ally. It's just not my thing. I think they deserve their place. They have a right to it. I'm all for their existence, everything they stand for. That's fine. They're welcome here. If they want to come legally migrate, no big deal. But I'm going to give you a scenario. I live in a very small neighborhood, a seven house on 2 to 3 acre spreads. If my neighbor comes over and says, hey, I've run out of bread, I've run out of milk, whatever, I'm going to give it to them without question. There's no question. I'm going to give that to them. Okay? They come the second day. I'm probably still going to give it to them, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, why didn't they go and get the bread this morning that they knew they didn't have? The third day, I'm going to tell them that Walmart's right down the road, right? And that's not to be egregious to them or make them feel like they're not welcome to come over and ask me for help if needed. But I've now crossed the line of support into enabling. It's not just Israel. It's Ukraine. It's Somalia. It's $40 million a week to Afghanistan, right? Which is going to the Taliban. Why are we doing that, guys? What is really going on that it's okay for us to stand here time and time again and give you a fallacy? It's just unimportant. Sometimes you got to close the door and say, hey, let's get the house cleaned up because we got guests coming. So I'm for ending foreign aid. That's the answer to that question.
The national debt is now over $34 trillion. How would you address the long-term problems associated with deficit spending, including specific spending cuts?
Kind of looks like a piggyback of the last question, but to double down on a more specific way to do it would be all the fraud, right? So, listen, I just read you the story. A 45-cent cartridge could have fixed the whole problem by the time $5.5 million was spent. And I don't say that to go out and kill coyotes. What I'm saying is, you got to use a little bit of logic here. As we all sit here and struggle, wondering what's going on, there's laws being passed and legislation being read that shouldn't even be part of a conversation. Having friends is one thing. Having allies is one thing. Like I said, enabling is another. And look, I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm going to tell you right now, one of my opponents in here just voted to send that money back to Minnesota to those Lehrering centers. Guys, what are we doing, right? And I don't mean to sound negative or take it out on the guy, but let's be real, let's be honest, what's going on, right? And then beyond that, look, I'm for what Rand Paul's doing right now. Strip the liability protection of these vaccine manufacturers and let the citizens go hog wild on them. Because, there's a lot of people that got injured and died from these things, and they didn't have the data to back up what they said they had. And listen, 2020 wasn't the most secure election. This stuff is real, guys. I think you need to look into it. If you're going to push stuff on somebody, make sure it's safe. I'd rather spend the money on researching the thing instead of just throwing it out at people and killing a bunch of people for no reason. So look, those PPP loans, a lot of money. And I'm not going to be hard on him, but there's a guy sitting here who took $9.7 million to a company, and the loan was forgiven. It was forgiven. That's $9.7 million of your money. And I'm not trying to be rude, I'm just being honest. And it's not just one person, there's many of them. And I can't really take it out on the guy. You want to know why? Because he read the law and he took advantage of it. So quit giving them the opportunity to take advantage of the law, and you might save some money and have a little bit here at home to take care of the things you got priorities for, right? That'd be the answer to that question. Thank you, guys.
We're going to bring it back home, back here in Northern Kentucky, the last one. If elected to the U.S. Senate, what specific federal priorities would you champion to ensure Northern Kentucky remains competitive, supports growing families, and continues to attract investments and jobs to our region?
I think I pretty well answered that in the first one, and by that I mean basically the tax credit to the locals, making sure the Brent Spence Bridge is built by locals, people within your area, whether it's shared with the southern end of Ohio and the northern part of Kentucky, and that I-75 and 71 corridor. But beyond that, you know, as a guy who's worked in the middle of CVG, I used to work there years ago. I worked about a year for a company called Timco, actually doing C checks on CRJ 900s. That was you know, kind of just a small bit of my experience from about 13 to 18, where I worked on fixed wing airplanes in the airliner space. And look, they could have used some updates then, not only to the hangar they were in, but the ramps and the surrounding airport. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't really been there in a while, and I don't know if you need upgrades, but if you need expansion, that'd be another thing to look at, right? Make sure that the stuff you're transporting, all the logistics that are coming in, don't have drugs in them, because there's going to be a large part of illegal activity going on in that space, whether you like it or not. So we need to, if we're going to spend money, make sure we're keeping the bad things out of one of the biggest logistic hubs in our state. You know, like Louisville, right? They have UPS and FedEx. There's a reason they chose that location, and there's a reason you chose this location. So, you know, you could get rid of a lot of bad traffic through there by doubling down on investigatory actions to make sure that you're keeping what's not supposed to be here and your people off of those things, and making sure that when they're waking up in the morning, they can go to work or maybe be an entrepreneur. Bringing back some trades, right? Because that's one of the biggest things that's been cut at the knees right now. Everybody wants to be on a computer or sitting at home or doing data or whatever. But you got pipe fitters, welders, you know, plumbers, electricians. All these trades are like going down the drain, and I'm seeing it right, you know, at floor level, because I got to work with them directly. Luckily for me, I'm able to kind of get the veteran community that is in our generation over to me, get them certified in the civil side at no cost to them, make them successful as civil entrepreneurs, or if they want to, you know, basically go and find their own way in aviation space. But these young cats don't have access to, you know, the things they need to succeed. You know, we're setting them out into a den of thieves and asking them to survive, while houses are continually growing in cost and jobs stay stale. So if you want to revitalize your state, and especially in this region, you put together stuff that will encourage those people to get those programs that become the next big thing that you can talk about and say is a successful thing. So that'd be my answer to that question. Thank you all for your time.
And next, I would like to welcome up our last speaker, U.S. Senate candidate Nate Morris.